Okay, everybody, students, can you open the mute, unmute your microphone to say hello to Dr. Evan?
Halo
Okay,
Dr. Evan.
Halo semuanya.
students, feel free to give a question to Dr. Evan after Dr. Evan finished his presentation, because in this webinar, I will share the slideshow or PowerPoint to you, to the all participants, via email. So keep in touch with your email, check your inbox. And now I'm recording this webinar through Google Meet, so I can share the webinar through your Google Drive. So you may check the link and then open the link, and you can watch it anytime. And yeah, you can download it or share it to your classmates or to your friends. Is it okay, Dr. Evan?
Yes. Yep. Siap. I will open up my my PowerPoint presentation just to make sure that everything's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And students,
Oh,
during the presentation, please, you have to mute your microphone, so you cannot disturb, or you don't disturb the presentation from Dr. Evan. So when I open the question and answer sessions, you can uh, give a question by verbal or writtenly. Okay.
All right, sir.
Maybe some of you doesn't know Dr. Evan. Dr. Evan, let me introduce him first. Dr. Evan was in Unismuh for 1 year and did many things for academic activity in FKIB, especially in our department, English Education Department. And maybe your senior, or maybe you, yeah, because your cohort this is your last semester. So, and then Dr. Evan was in 2017 in here. Okay, and now Dr. Evan uh, runs his second PhD in University of Sydney in Sydney. But Dr. Evan is a senior lecturer in the University of Newcastle. So, if you want to make more communication or asking something to Dr. Evan, I will take a permission from Dr. Evan to share the email of. Okay,
Sure.
because 1 o'clock right now, so we can start your material with Dr. Evan in this webinar. This is our first webinar actually, so I hope the students are happy and take many benefits from this webinar. Okay, Dr. Evan, time's yours.
Thank you, Ismail. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about qualitative research, something that I have quite a lot of experience in, and is a method that I enjoy doing. Okay, the opening slide there, you can see a picture of a man with his face going into the water, and that's meant to show you that qualitative research is about looking beneath the surface. Okay, in today's session, I'm going to provide just an overview of qualitative research. I'm going to only cover some of the basic concepts that you really need to understand if you're planning a qualitative study. So, what is qualitative research? Well, it really is just simply a method not a theory, a method of collecting the data that you need to answer your research question. And qualitative research questions are best formed as how and why questions, how something happens, how people respond to the COVID-19 crisis, for example, and why questions, like why do they respond in the way that they do. So qualitative research is really suited to get an insider's point of view. We need to talk to the people who have the information that we need to answer our research questions. So if I'm interested in what it's like to work at a university, then I need to talk to people like Doran or the rector or decans who work at that university, because they have the information that I need. And of course, qualitative research is often about talking to people and asking them questions, but it also could be about observing people, especially in their natural settings, where they work, where they live, where they play. And also qualitative research includes research where we're analyzing documents or texts, such as media reports, official documents, government policies, that kind of thing. But it also can be used to analyze films, works of art, books. So qualitative research is often used for describing and understanding events and attitudes and behaviors. It can actually be used for almost any topic. A woman's experience of childbirth, the relationships between teachers and students, criminal behavior, the experience of COVID-19. And we do all this to try and gain insight into the behavior or the event or the setting or a culture. And that's what it's best suited for. It can also be used to generate hypotheses that you might want to test, maybe using an experiment or maybe using a survey. And it can also be used in combination with qualitative methods in mixed methods study. I think a good way to understand what qualitative research is to compare it to quantitative research. If your research question is asking how much or how many or how often, then you're going to require a number for an answer. And if you need numbers, then your best design is a quantitative design. But if you're asking questions like how and why, then you'll need to answer your question with words. And that's where qualitative research has its great strength. Of course, one of the main features of qualitative research is that it's interpretive. It involves interpretation. That is, we use our knowledge and understanding to build new understanding of whatever the situation could be that you're interested in. And some of the most common methods of qualitative research are case studies and ethnography. And we'll go through a few more of those right now. So there are many different types of qualitative research. As you can see, there's a list there. And these different types, like case studies and ethnography, actually come from different backgrounds. I think someone needs to turn off their mic there. Okay, as you can see, there's quite a list there of different types. Some of those types might not be familiar to you, and others will be. And we'll talk about more of them in a second. Thank you. So although we saw those many different types of qualitative research, they all kind of use very similar data collection and data analysis procedures. They generally will involve methods such as interviewing people, that is, talking to people and asking them questions, observations such as participant observation or non-participant observation. That might involve you going to a school or a university or a police station or a hospital and observing how the people within those places act. You can also use things like focus group discussions. We can also analyze texts. The sampling in a qualitative research is generally quite different to that in quantitative research. We'll talk about a little bit more about that in a second. And it uses purposive sampling, which is, we will cover that again in a second. And it has its own unique way of analyzing the data it collects. And remembering that that data is largely words, sometimes images. And the data analysis involves coding and categorizing, generating themes, and sometimes creating typologies. A typology is where you put things into types. So if you're examining student-teacher relationships, you might put those into different categories or different types, such as a friendly relationship or a hostile relationship, and that would be a typology. One of the unique things about qualitative research is that you as the researcher are actually the instrument. Qualitative research doesn't involve using things like metrics, like psychological scales. It doesn't involve counting things, as I said before. What it does involve is you as the researcher using your own knowledge and your own understanding of the social world, because qualitative research is always about the social world. It always involves people. We don't use qualitative research to look at natural phenomena such as animals or trees. We only ever use it for people. And so because you as the researcher are the instrument, your understanding is central to every aspect of the research. You select the sample, you decide who it is that has the information that you need. And then once you've got the information that you need, it's you that interprets the data. Because of this very subjective nature of qualitative research, we have to always be reflexive. And that rather strange word means that we always have to remember, when we're doing qualitative research, that we are interpreting. And we need to use various methods that we'll go through in a little while to make sure that we don't introduce bias into our analysis. Okay, in designing qualitative research, there's a number of things that you have to consider and a number of decisions that you have to make. You have to decide what type of qualitative research you're going to use. You have to decide who it is, has the information that you need, and so you have to decide the sample. You then have to choose exactly how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to analyze the data, and then how you're going to make sure that your analysis isn't biased. That is, you're going to have to ensure that your analysis is valid, or as we say in qualitative research, that it's credible. And then you also have to consider how generalizable your findings are. And that means how widely you can apply the findings of your studies to other groups, to other samples. And we'll go through these a little more carefully now. In choosing a type, I think the first question is, what is it that you want to describe or explain? And so you need to take some time when you're thinking about your research question to decide exactly what it is, what kind of phenomena that your study is going to look at, that your research question is asking about. And there are so many different kinds of social phenomena, and each of those types of grounded of qualitative research types is best applied to particular kinds of things or phenomena. So events and practices probably would be best studied using a grounded theory approach. If you were looking at an organization, say a university or a hospital or a government department, you might use a case study. If you're after individuals' experiences, like what it's like to have a particular illness or what it's like to lose your job, then you might use an approach like phenomenology. If you're interested in a culture, and that can be quite broad, like the culture of a nation, or it could be the culture of a province, or it could be the culture of a particular profession, like teaching, then you might use ethnography. If you're interested in how the media presents political stories or stories on social issues, then you might use discourse analysis. If you're interested in history, and again, that could be the history of a very broad group, like the history of a nation, or an individual person's history, then you might use narrative analysis. I said the way to decide which one of these methods, these types that you're going to use, is to first of all be very clear about what it is that you're studying, what it is that your research question is asking about. Sampling. I've been teaching qualitative research methods for quite some years, and sampling is often one of those questions that you get asked a lot about. Now, qualitative researchers use a particular approach to sampling, which is very different to quantitative sampling, where you use probabilistic sampling, like simple random sampling, where you generate a big list of say people and then choose them at random, so that eventually you'll be able to generalize to that whole population from which you took your sample. Sampling in qualitative research does not involve that kind of probabilistic sampling. What it needs is you as the researcher, you as the research instrument, for you to judge who or what has the information that you need to answer your research question. Now, there are many different types of qualitative sampling. Some of the most common sampling methods are things like a typical case sampling. A typical case is where, say, if you wanted to study the culture of a school and you had 40 schools in your province, then you might choose a school that really is very similar to every other school in your province, of all the other 40 schools. So that because it's typical, because it's a typical case, hopefully then, whatever your findings in that school will tell you something or help explain what happens in the other schools that it's like. An extreme case sampling is another example of a qualitative sampling method, and that's where we choose a case that's very, very different from all of the typical cases, because that case, being so extremely different, can tell us something about all of the other cases, about why the other cases are so similar and why this case is so different. A maximum variation case is when, if you have, say, 40 schools in your province, some of those schools are in the city, some of them are in the rural areas, some schools are, have quite wealthy students, other schools have quite poor students, then and you want to say something that covers all of those different variations, then you might choose a school from the country, a school from the city, a school that has rich students, a school that has less rich or poor students. There are many other methods. There's about, all told, I think there's about 20 different types of qualitative sampling methods. They're not particularly complicated, but again, depending on what you want to do, depending on what your research question is asking, will determine the type of sampling that you use. And sample size, again, this is a really big question from people wanting to, when they're first starting out with qualitative research. And one of the reasons why it's a big question is that in quantitative research, we nearly always have to calculate a sample size at the start of the research. You can't do that with a qualitative study. It's very difficult to predict how many people you will need to get all of the information you need, which is why in qualitative research, sample size is decided by the principle of redundancy. And what redundancy means is that you keep collecting data until you're not learning anything new each time you go and get a new case. So if I've interviewed 15 people, say 15 teachers, and I'm no longer learning anything when I recruit a 16th person, I just hear the same stories, I just get the same information, then it's that I have reached redundancy. Nothing new is coming from new cases, so I can stop sampling. I think a lot of people get uneasy with this principle, but it's an accepted principle within qualitative research. And as long as you can show that you have reached redundancy, and one other thing about redundancy is that you're not getting any new information about your research question. You could always get new information that lies outside of your research question, but in relation to your research question, if you're not learning anything new, you can stop sampling. Data collection. Again, there are a number of different ways of collecting data in qualitative research. And again, depending on your research question, depending on what it is that you want to learn, is going to determine what method you use. Having said that, there are also some very practical measures. So take the first data collection method there, observation, participant and non-participant observation. Sometimes it's not possible to observe. Sometimes you don't need to observe, but sometimes it's just simply not possible to observe. For instance, if you were wanting to observe illegal drug use or some criminal act, it's going to be very difficult for you to design a study where you could observe those things. So observation is probably not possible. But in many other cases, observation is entirely possible. I think someone needs to turn their mic off there. So if I'm wanting to observe how nurses and doctors interact when they are dealing with patients, I may be able to observe their behavior and their interaction with their patients, as long as I get permission, of course. And observation is a very, very powerful way of collecting data and of learning about a culture or an event or practices. Probably the second method, semi-formal interviewing, is the most common way of collecting data in qualitative research. And that's because, one, talking to people, you can get a lot of information in a very short time. They're inexpensive to do, and they're quite easy to organize. They can be complicated, especially at first when you're first starting to do interviews, But the more you learn and the more you do interviews, they do get easier. And because of that, I think probably 70 to 80% of qualitative studies will involve interviewing, and many of those will only involve interviewing. Another quite common way of collecting qualitative data is focus group discussions. These have become very popular in things like political studies, political polling, and marketing. But they're also used in academic research, and they're a very good way of getting a lot of data in a short time from a group of people. One of the attractions, one of the benefits of a focus group discussion is that people are interacting together in the discussion. As one person answers, that might raise an issue for another person, and they can then contribute to the discussion. So you have this group dynamic. People can disagree with each other. So you get, within a short space of time, if you've got, say, 10 people for an hour, you can get a lot of information and understand how people agree and disagree on certain issues and why they agree and disagree. And of course, we also have texts, and we can use many different kinds of texts in qualitative research, everything from news reports, novels, films, and many other kinds of documents that I said before. One thing to remember is data collection is not complicated. All you're really doing is selecting a group of people that have the information that you need, and then you're talking to them or observing them, and from that you'll get to understand what it is they believe, what their attitudes are, and how they behave. So now we come to interpretive data analysis. This is probably the most complicated and tricky parts of qualitative research because it involves interpreting. As you can read through there on that list, interpretation in qualitative research basically involves a coding exercise. It's very hard to describe coding in a presentation such as this, and it's something that really is only understood with practice. It's something that you need to practice. However, what it really involves is reading through data, if like in a transcript of an interview, and identifying the ideas that in the data that the person has said. And then you take those ideas, you give them a label, a conceptual label, and then you compare all of these ideas. And as you compare them and see how they are similar and how they are different, you then group them into categories, into more general categories. And you keep that process up. After each interview, if you do your data analysis after each interview, you continue doing that. You continue comparing the codes and putting them into ever more general categories. And often the most general category that will be used in a qualitative study will be a theme. And a theme is something that sort of captures something that's common across all of your interviews or all of your observations, and that really represents the main meanings. Now, as I said before, qualitative research is a subjective exercise, and it's very hard to get away from the fact that you are the research instrument and that it's your understandings that are being used to create the findings. And so there is something of a validity issue with qualitative research. In qualitative research, we usually refer to validity as credibility. And so you have to decide how you're going to make sure that you don't introduce bias into your findings and that your interpreting findings are credible. And there are a number of ways of doing this: documentation, triangulation, and reflexivity. Reflexivity we spoke to before, which is about maintaining your awareness that you are interpreting and being very careful with your interpretations. Documenting is also called an audit trail, simply means that you record all of the decisions to do with your sampling, your data collection, and your coding. That way, if someone, once you present your findings, someone can say, well, why did you code that idea in that way? You can go back and you can show the person that's asked the question why you have coded it in that way, why you have interpreted the data in that way. And one of the things that we do in presenting results of qualitative research is show the data that we're using. So we present quotes from our data so that someone else that's reading that quote can see whether your interpretation of that quote is credible or is valid. Quickly going through a couple more things. Triangulation is where we use a number of different methods to make sure that that we're not presenting bias in our interpretation. We also can ask the people that we've spoken to check our interpretation. That's called member checking. And we can also, once we've got an interpretation, once we've got a theme, we can go back to our data or collect more data and see if that theme is valid, as that it still appears in the data. Finally, generalizability, also called transferability, is quite different in qualitative research than it is in quantitative research. It's not about statistics. The findings of your study, really, what should happen is you should be able to take, if you've done a good job with your qualitative research, what your findings of the situation that you've studied should help us understand similar situations. And there are a couple of ways of strengthening that, as you can see there, through sampling and making sure that you've got, say, typical cases in your sample. Okay. I've taken a little longer than I wanted to there, so we don't have much time for questions, but I'm willing to answer any questions in the time that's left.
Okay, nice presentation, Dr. Evan. Thank you. And now we're moving to question and answer sessions from the students or for participants. Should they give your question verbally or writtenly?
It's okay, whichever.
Okay. Okay. Let's open the session questioning. For other participants, you may leave your questions at the chat column. Yeah, so I can read the questions and Dr. Evan will answer your questions. Okay.
Umi.
Okay, please open. Please
I just saw Bu Umi.
Oh, yeah. Ibu Umi, the lecturers here are joining now, Ibu Umi and Ibu Eni, Eni Satriana,
Bu Eni?
and Mr. Heri Hermawan, yeah, who are teaching in this department, and the rest is students from Unismuh, from another university, I guess. Okay, please unmute your microphone to give a question to Dr. Evan. Okay. Oh, yeah. Dr. Umi.
Oh. Hi, Prof. Evan. How are you?
Hey, hello, Bu Umi. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Okay. It's a very nice presentation from you about the qualitative research. So,
thank you.
Yeah. So, I would like to ask more about the triangulation in data analysis. So, can you explain more or explain in details how do you we conduct about the triangulation analysis data? Because
Yeah, well, there's usually...
I'm still blank about that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Triangulation is...
Thank you, Bumi.
there's usually 3 types of triangulation. There's methods triangulation, and research triangulation, and participant triangulation. And each one, it just means using one or more in methods. We could maybe use interviews and focus groups.
Hmm?
Or we could use interviews and texts to asking the same question. But because we're using 2 methods,
Yeah.
we can see if we get the same kinds of answers using the same methods. Or and the same principle goes with researcher triangulation. If I'm interpreting an interview and then I get a second researcher to interpret the interview, and we both come up with the same interpretation, we can be more confident that we're not being overly subjective, we're not being biased. Does that help, Buumi?
Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
Bumi.
So I think one thing to remember with triangulation, you can always do qualitative research by yourself, and that can be very powerful. But if your colleagues are concerned that the qualitative methods is too subjective, always use a second analyst. Even if that's not for the whole study, but just for the analysis part. Use a second researcher.
Oh. Okay, you say that in the triangulation method, we can use in more than one method. Do you mean here we can use in a qualitative and quanti? Do you mean?
Well, yeah, you can. Well, yeah, that's not really triangulation, but it is in a way. But mixed methods are very, very common, and it does triangulate the data. So if I do a survey, then it can be very powerful way of triangulating the data. Is to then maybe also do some interviews with the people that I surveyed to confirm the results of the survey, or to extend the results of the survey. So although it's not usually called triangulation, it does fulfill the same purpose by taking 2 looks from 2 different directions. Remember, triangulation comes from survey, yeah?
Yes.
We take 2 bearings to identify the position of an object. So that's why that metaphor is used in qualitative research. We use either 2 different researchers, 2 different methods, 2 different theories. You can also use theory triangulation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Is that enough, Ibu Mi?
everyone. Yes. I will read more about it, but your explanation is very good. Thank you so much for.
You always ask hard questions, Boo.
As usual. Okay. Other participants, please. For the students, if you're difficult to give question in English, you may mix your questions. I will try to translate your questions.
Hello, sir.
Okay,
Hello.
Satrianto, please.
Okay, hello, Prof. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Satrianto.
All right. So it was a very excellent explanation. Well, I would like to. Yes, I would like to ask about the sample size, Prof.
Yep.
Well, just now you were saying that talk about the sample size, it's hard to predict, right? Well, my question is there any minimum or maximum in doing sample?
Yeah, this is a question that I'm always asked. They're not strictly, because if you're doing, say, a phenomenology study, you could just use 1 person.
All right.
If you're doing what they call an autoethnography, you could use 1 person. But having said that, there's it's very common that around 10 to 12 people will usually get you to that principle of redundancy. Depending on how complicated the issue it is researching, 10 to 12 people will usually where you'll go to. But it could be as few as 8. If you're only talking to, if you wanted to find the culture of a department and there's only 8 people in that department, then you can do all 8 people and that's it, that's your sample.
All right.
So, as I say, I think the principle of redundancy is very helpful, even though often when you've got your proposal and you're writing your research proposal, it would be nice to say, I will need so many people. But it's certainly accepted in Australia that if you're putting a qualitative research proposal in, that you can say, we can't anticipate the sample size now, but we think 15 people should be sufficient. You can say things like that.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. I think it was very understandable. Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak, Satriato.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Eric.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Pandoro, for your presentation, and it's a great explanation, I think. So I just want to ask you, Dr. Doran, because just now you explained about the mixed method. So I am still confused actually by the mixed method. As long as I consider mixed method only the combination between qualitative and quantitative method. So my questions actually is, but do you have what is actually, can you explain more about this? Because I only understand about, oh yeah, when we are talking about quantitative, it is about experimental, for example, and when we are talking about qualitative method, it is about the descriptive or the other. So my question is about, do you have probably you have another description about this term, I mean the mixed method. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, thank you for your question. I think, yes, you're right. Mixed method usually refers to the mixing of quantitative and qualitative. You can have an experiment with a qualitative element to it, such as, say, if you had the trial of a new drug, you could give the drug to the people and see how well it benefits them, like say whether it fixes their high blood pressure. Then you could also interview them to find out how they felt about using it, what their experience of using this drug was. But I think usually mixed methods is more common to, say, use a survey and an interview study. So there's a couple of ways that can happen. Often with a survey, before you do the survey, you might do a number of interviews. So you'll do an interview study. And from those interviews, what you learn from those interviews, you will include in your questionnaire. So you then have, because you've done those interviews, before you've made your questionnaire, and before you've done your survey, your questionnaire will be more valid. It will be a stronger questionnaire because you went out and spoke to people first. Another way of mixing methods, like surveys and interviews, is to do a survey, and then once you've done the survey, you can then interview people that completed the survey to get more information about the issues, or you could use the interviews to make sure that people understood the questionnaire. one of the problems with questionnaires is that people often don't understand them, and maybe they answer the question incorrectly. So if you do interviews after your survey, then you can check to make sure that people did understand. And again, that will make your survey results stronger and more valid. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's all. Dr. Evan, thanks so much. It is very useful and meaningful for me. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Harry. Thank you.
Okay. Now 42 minutes.
Okay,
Still 30 minutes.
that's all right.
But it's very good because the participants give some questions. It's okay. I need one more or two more questions.
Yeah, two more, and then we'll have to finish.
Okay, two more questions. Okay, students. No more. Okay, I think no more questions.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
And close. Maybe you have something to say to English department here in Unismuh, your second university in Indonesia.
Yeah, yes, it is my second university. Yes. I just it's great to be doing something with Unismuh again.
Thank you very much.
I hope to be visiting there again next year. I was hoping we might be this year, but with COVID-19, it looks like it will be next year.
Yeah, really sad.
I hope next year when I speak to you, I'll be able to berbicara dalam bahasa Indonesia.
Of course, participants, students, Dr. Evan is a good Indonesian speaker in Australia. Okay, always practicing.
Practicing, yeah. But it's lovely to see my good friend Ismail. And please, if I'm happy to do this kind of thing again, if it's going to be useful for the mahasiswa at Unismuh.
Unismuh. Yeah, on behalf of our leader here, Mr. Erwin, say hello to you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, to deliver this webinar. Thank you very much. Yeah. So, you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much for listening to me and for all of your intelligent questions.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. See you.
See you.
Okay, see you.
See you.